Welcome everyone to today's webinar for Artemis Resources Limited, ASX code ARV. Shortly, I'll introduce Artemis Executive Director George Ventouras, who will provide an update on the company's gold, copper and lithium exploration and recent developments in the Pilbara region, including the exceptionally high-grade gold results reported in veins at the Titan prospect. At the completion of this presentation, George will also be on hand to answer any questions you may have. So, as the presentation is occurring, if you do have any questions, submit them at any time using the Q&A button on the screen, and I'll put them to George during the Q&A session. Okay, let's get started. I'd now like to introduce Artemis Resources Executive Director George Ventouras. George, over to you.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks everyone for joining us. It really is a pleasure to be here and talk about all things Artemis. It's one of my favourite subjects, so I take great pleasure in being able to talk around the company, the projects, and to give you a bit of insight about what we hope to achieve over the next few months or so. There's quite a lot of information to go through. We have released the deck on the ASX and the AIM market this morning, so please feel free to speak back, have a look at that at your leisure. I won't go through every slide in great detail, but I'll try and touch on the most important points. And as David suggested, we'll cover some questions at the end. So next slide, please. The usual disclaimers, I won't go into those in detail. As I say, please look at those at your leisure. Of course, a welcome to traditional owners. We do acknowledge and pay our respects to them, the Ngarluma Aboriginal group, who we work really closely with in the West Pilbara. Pardon me, and they've been really supportive of the work we're doing up here, so we thank them sincerely. So Artemis Resources, we've got some fantastic commodities. We've got a great location, a tier 1 jurisdiction. We've got a huge amount of exploration upside, a starting mineral resource, and we also have a processing plant at Radio Hill. So we've certainly got some strategic assets in a fantastic location, and we'll talk about those a little bit more individually as we go through. Next slide, please. So our portfolio, as suggested, is in the West Pilbara. We hold a fairly substantial position, more than 200 square k's of tenure. We're in an emerging commodity hub. There's a lot of action going on in that region. We're very, very close to Karratha. It's only about a 20-minute drive to our projects. And for those of you who don't know, Karratha is a major regional hub full of logistical services, admin, there's a port. It provides everything on our doorstep, so it's a fantastic location. Karratha is only 2 hours from Perth, so it's a really easily accessible project to get to. So it certainly works in our favour. We've got a swag of 100% owned ground. We've got high-value commodities that are in the news, and we've got a processing plant, as I suggested earlier, that is and will become a strategic asset for us in the future. Next slide, please. Gold is a focus at the moment, and gold's been in the Artemis DNA for a while. So it's something that we're really quite passionate about. And as we all know, and we can see from the chart, the gold price is certainly reaching record highs. It's a fantastic time to be involved in the commodity at this time. And the analysts are suggesting that the price will go even higher towards the back end of this year and leading into next year. So we are certainly hitting the commodity at the right time. And we know that with some exploration success, we will be rewarded for that. Next slide, please. So the gold is where we're at right now. This is the Karratha Gold Project. And the Karratha Gold Project covers our 3 major tenements in the West Pilbara. We have identified multiple prospective zones, as you can see with the blue marks there on that map. And these are quite wide mineralised zones that we've discovered through a variety of ground reconnaissance and prior drilling that Artemis achieved in the past. Again, we're located very closely to Karratha and to Roebourne, another regional town. And as you can see on that map, there's already a host of prospects that have been identified to this point, but it's certainly something we're confident we can add to as we do more reconnaissance as time goes on. So we'll just go into some of these prospects in a little more detail on some of the next slides. So next one, please, David. So as I suggested, at Artemis, we start with a mineral resource at our Carlo Castle project. It sits on around 700,000 ounce equivalent of gold, which contains about 370,000 ounces of gold, 64,000 tonnes of copper and 8,000 tonnes of cobalt. So it's a true polymetallic discovery. It is open in all directions still. There is an exploration target on there of 200 to 500,000 ounce equivalent. So we know this thing can get bigger. We know it's open at depth. We know it's open in strike and width. And what we need to do now and in the ensuing months and period of time is to do further drilling. And as you might be able to see from that diagram, most of the drilling that was done at Carlo was only quite shallow. So really 50 to 100, 150 metres deep, that's maxed out. And as you can see, as we're getting deeper, the grade's getting higher. So as we track this down, and this potentially could be an open pit with an underground component, but as we track this down, we believe we'll find more gold mineralisation, getting higher grade, and really be able to unlock the potential of this project. And in the past, I guess where Artemis was sitting is we're looking at where we could make Carlo bigger. How could we grow this resource? And since coming on board to Artemis in late last year, we sat down with the exploration team and we're looking at from a slightly different perspective of not so much how big we can make Carlo, and we know we can make it bigger by virtue of what we're seeing in the geology and the drill results, but we're more intent on how many Carlos we can find. And we're fortunate that we've got a neighbour about 150 kilometres to the east of us, and that's De Grey with their Hemi deposit. And for those who don't know of De Grey, they're sitting north of 10 or 11 million ounces of gold. And their project's made up of a combination of smaller projects or smaller conceptual pits that make up the overall resource. So if we flick to the next slide now, please, you'll be able to see the sort of thing that we're looking at. So this is our Carlo tenement. You can see the Carlo resource just to the east of the middle of the tenement there, again with that 700,000 ounce equivalent. But what we're looking at doing is, as I say, taking a step back, looking at the tenement en masse, looking at the structures, looking at the faults, looking at the shear zones, and working out how many Carlos we can find. We know that there's more mineralisation there. We're seeing it. We'll talk about it in a moment. These things don't happen in isolation, so we have the potential to find more of these things. And look, if we can build Carlo to north of 500,000 ounces of true gold, and we can find half a dozen Carlos, then there is the potential for a multi-million ounce deposit that will give us, a pipeline of 20 years plus at 100, 150,000 ounces a year. So that's the sort of goal we're trying to achieve. That's the exploration we're designing. And these are the prospects that we're starting with. So just having a look at what we've got now. We've got Carlo North, which obviously sits to the north of the Carlo deposit, elevated copper and gold in soils. At Marillion, just underneath there is a conductor plate that was identified a little while ago. Very high Siemens, 11,000, which is supremely high, and that's something that will demand some follow-up drilling. And that could be an extension of Carlo. It could be a separate mineralised event, but until we do the work, we really don't know what's going on. So that's really exciting. A little bit further to the south, Chapman, there was a wildcat hole. Hit some really good numbers of copper and gold, up to 3 grams and 6% copper. Moving on to Thorpe, again, structural sequence that seems to be paralleling that Carlo type anomaly. Recent rock chip sample, 6 grams of gold and 23.5% of copper. So they're really high numbers. Europa, just to the side of that, is sitting in and around the same sort of gravity structures, magnetic targets and faults that Carlo is. So it's a really compelling target for us. We're seeing gold in soils, and that's something that we'll certainly be following up. And at the moment, with the last release that you may have seen on the Titan prospect sitting to the north, that's something that's certainly really exciting. We've got some really high-grade rock chip assays, north of 10,000 grams a tonne, and we're seeing lots of gold in hard rock. So, in and around these prospects, this is where we believe, and I must point out that these are the prospects that have only been identified to date. So we're in the process of mapping the tenements, looking at all the structures, seeing where we can see potential gold veins to try and work out what other prospects we can find. And as we suggest, these things don't happen in isolation. If there's one, there's more, and we're definitely seeing that now. Next slide, please. But Titan is the main one that we've been looking at. It was the subject of the last release. This diagrammic or schematic on the right gives you an idea of the style of mineralization we're seeing at Titan. So what we're seeing is gold in hard rock and quartz. What we're not seeing are freewheeling nuggets. And that's something that it's really quite important, because Artemis a number of years ago were known or quite famous for their watermelon seed gold nugget discovery. There was a plenitude of nuggets found. It was the thought of the start of another gold rush. It didn't quite eventuate. But what's important to know is the nuggets that were found previously were all quite smooth. So it indicated they had travelled a distance from the source. What we're seeing at Titan is we're actually sitting on the source. We're sitting on the source of this quartz gold vein. And that's really important, because we're not tracking nuggets. We're actually at the source of where the gold comes from. We're hitting really high numbers, as I said before, north of 10,000 grams a tonne. The lab maxed out. They couldn't get a number on it. But some other high readings and some of the rock chips. And this is just at surface. We scrapped some of the surface material away, collected about 300 kilos, and that's where we were able to produce that 10-ounce gold bar. So it's a really exciting prospect for us, and it's one that will demand most of our forward ground reconnaissance over the next few weeks or so. It's only a couple of k's away from Carlo. So again, it has this potential to be this multi-prospect element, bigger picture project in the Carlo tenement. We've tracked it for about 700 metres. It's open in all directions. It doesn't happen in isolation, and that's a really important point. I know I've said it multiple times, but where there's one, there's more. So we're really excited about what this suggests to us in the Carlo tenement. Next slide, please. Moving on from Carlo, we do have other tenements, Osborne, Silica Hills, and again, what we're seeing are a number of prospects that were previously identified with some really interesting rock chip numbers. So we're hitting highs of 23 grams at Orpheus through the central east portion. Recent program at Nickel River Hill South saw us get 7 grams almost of gold and not quite 11% of copper. So there's some really interesting mineralization going on, and it follows these trends that we described in one of the first slides with those blue mineralized zones. So we're really seeing that in the ground reconnaissance that we're undertaking. Further to the north, we've got the Singwell, Sing6 prospects, which is another area that's highly mineralized. We've got some gold out of there. There's some previous drilling. And then, of course, to the north, we have our Lulu Creek prospect. And that's something that's probably the most developed out of those prospects that you can see on those tenement maps. And it's something we'll talk to on the next slide, please, David. So Lulu Creek is quite an advanced prospect. There were about 100 RC holes drilled in around 2020. Some interesting gold hits, almost 5 grams of gold from only 24 meters. So the important thing with this is that all that drilling that was done was only down to about 50 meters. So it's quite shallow. It was like a first pass reconnaissance drill program. But what they're saying is regard to the geological structure, where it sits in and amongst the thrusts and the faults and the style of mineralization that they believe exists there, it's becoming reminiscent of an intrusive related gold system, which is similar to the De Grey Hemi deposit. Now, we're not suggesting that it could potentially hold that many millions of ounces, but what we're saying is that it's a similar sort of structure, similar sort of geology, so it has the potential to hold gold mineralization. And that's something that we'd like to be testing. So last year, an IP survey was conducted. It's thrown up 3 anomalies, the northern, the central, the southern, as you can see on that map. And that's something that we will be looking to drill in the very short term. We're fortunate enough to have a government grant co-funding drilling on the Lulu Creek prospect. The government geologists thought it compelling enough and similar enough and reminiscent enough of that intrusive related system to award us with that government grant. So we have heritage clearances already. We have ethnographic surveys completed. We're now waiting on a final written report, so that clears the pathway to drilling. And once we have that, then we'll be able to get the drill rig on site and get it spinning. And those anomalies will be the first ones we drill. They're about 250 meters depth. So once we start punching a few holes in those anomalies, we'll start to figure out what the geology is doing, where the mineralization is, and then be able to track it from there. So that's a near-term prospect that we will be looking at drilling very shortly. Next slide, please. Exploration potential on Silica Hills, as I suggested before, it's got a huge amount of prospectivity. These were some of the results of a first pass ground recon we did just over a couple of months ago. hitting some good numbers on the ground, as you can see on that southwest corner, Nickel River Hill South, not quite 7 grams of gold and almost 11% copper. So compelling numbers. And the interesting thing on that map is that all those tan lines that you see as a mishmash through that tenement, they are all structures and faults. And we know that these structural corridors and these faults present opportunities for fluid pathways. So as the gold comes up from the Earth's core, it follows these structures, these faults, and this is in through the quartz is where the potential for this gold to be deposited. So we're looking at really highly prospective ground. There's a picture of some nuggets there, and we put that in because it's really quite descriptional of what we're seeing. So nuggets in the past were very smooth, suggested they were traveling a fair way from the source. The important thing about these small nuggets, which we found near surface, is that they're very angular. And that's an important thing to point out because what that suggests is that they haven't traveled far from source. So have a look at these pieces. The geologists believe that we're only about 50 to 100 meters away from the source of where these pieces come from. So again, we're talking about tracking it down to the gold veins and finding this gold in the hard rock, so the source of this material. So that's some really compelling evidence that we're sitting pretty close to the source. Next slide, please. So that's our gold projects. Look, it's really exciting and really compelling, and we're looking forward to more exploration. The lithium is not something that we're leaving to the side. It's a really important project for us. Again, we're sitting on a large land holding right in the middle of a tier 1 jurisdiction. We're located about 15 kilometres from Azure Minerals and their huge exploration target of 240 million tonnes. And we know that that will get bigger. So we're sitting in a great location to be able to continue with the lithium exploration. Next slide, please. Our lead project in the lithium space is our Mount Marie prospect. It was discovered earlier this year. It's an outcropping swarm of pegmatites. We've tracked it for about 250 metres of strike length at this point. And the really important and compelling thing about this prospect is the grade. We hit rock chip samples. We've got multiple above 4% lithium oxide, but we actually hit a higher 4.67% lithium oxide. And to put that into context, at Azure, when they were doing their early pass of ground reconnaissance and doing their rock chipping, they hit a high of 4.87. So we're paralleling with the highest grade in the region. We're sitting on a spodumene-hosted mineralogy. We've had that confirmed with the university. This spodumene the crystals are big. We've seen them up to 25 centimetres. They're big, they're coarse grain. And that highlights not only the prospectivity, but also highlights the developmental pathway because big, coarse grain spodumene crystals are far easier to process than other materials. Other materials are not impossible. It's just that the spodumene in that big, coarse grain crystal is a far easier proposition. So developers do like this sort of mineralogy. As I say, we've tracked it for about 250 metres. It doesn't disappear. It goes undercover, and we're doing some work now just to work out what the potential strike length is. Sitting just to the south of Mount Marie, we have our Osborne East prospect. We're getting 0.5% more on rock chips all day long. So it's a really interesting precinct. As I say, and it's worth mentioning again, 15 k's from Azure. We're sitting on similar geological structures. We're sitting off the back of the Andover complex. So we're pretty excited about the pathway. And whilst the lithium prices may have come back a bit and the market's a little bit soft, all the analysts are predicting a return, a resurgence. And with the exploration plans that we've got coming forward, we think we'll be in the right time at the right space for that next uplift in the lithium price. Next slide, please. So that Mount Marie and the Osborne East, they're our 100% owned tenements, and we haven't fully explored. This map shows you the joint venture we have with Greentech Metals, which was spun out of Artemis a couple of years ago. Artemis holds a 49% share of the lithium, but we do hold 100% of the gold rights, so it's worth mentioning that. But again, in the Osborne tenement, we're seeing multiple higher grade rock chips. At the Kobe Trend towards the north, we're seeing 1.5% plus lithium oxide continuously. And in the southern trend, that southern prospect, we're seeing 3.6%. So high grade, lots of combined strike length. And we think, and you can see that yellow dotted line, and the belief is that the Kobe trend may well link up to the Mount Marie prospect. And if that's the case, and we're correct in that assumption, and then we look at the southern area and we see the southern zone and whether that links up with our Osborne East prospect. And if these things do go the way we assume they do, what we're looking at is around about 26 kilometres of continuous lithium strike. And that's, we're talking serious amount of area here. It's not a small project. Pegmatites, usually stacked. We need to do the work underground and drill to be able to ascertain how deep they go, what grade they are, how much there is. But typically there's a reservoir of lithium and the pegmatites extrapolate from that reservoir, and that's where you get this stacked formation. We've done a little bit of stratigraphic drilling late last year to understand the geology. We have a much better picture of what we're doing now. Again, heritage clearances, ethnographic clearances have been achieved, waiting for a final report to give us the green light to be able to drill. So the lithium projects as a whole, it's really exciting, and it's certainly a space that we'll be doing some work on in the short to medium term. Next slide, please. One of the more strategic assets, we have the Radio Hill processing plant. It's 100% owned. It's got a capacity of around 500,000 tonnes, give or take. It's only 35 k's from Crafer, almost all on bitumen road. Really easy to get to, really convenient. The plant's been on care and maintenance for a while. It has produced nickel and copper concentrate previously. But the most important thing that we've got there is that it's fully permitted, it's fully licensed. There's water, there's power, there's tailing dams. So really, as far as the developmental pathway is concerned, we're 2 years down the track beyond anybody else. And that could be pivoted towards almost any commodity. Some of the plant needs a bit of work, but irrespective, no matter which commodity you look at, things could be adopted, changed, pivoted with some capex to be able to produce almost any commodity at that site. As I say, it's permitted, it's licensed, it's a really strategic asset. And we've been in discussions with various people in the past about how to best utilise that asset. And that's something that will be part of the narrative moving forward. So we think it's strategic. We like it. We like the location. We like the possibilities. Something we'll certainly explore in the future. Next slide, please. Lastly, one of the projects that we do have in the portfolio, the Patterson Central Copper Gold Project. It's in a really, really interesting jurisdiction. We are right on the doorstep of Havieron in their multi-million ounce equivalent project, owned by Greatland and Newmont at the moment. We're only about 45 k's away from Telfer and their multi-million ounce development production story. And what we've done there, that's 600 k's of essentially greenfields. There's been some work done. Artemis has drilled previously. There's a number of prospects, as you can see. And in those holes that they first drilled and some of the mineralogy that they were seeing, and we had some reviews done by some geologists who were involved in Telfer. They're involved in Havieron. And their comments are that if they drilled that at Havieron, what we drilled at our prospects, they would consider that a near miss. Pardon me. So we know we're in the right rocks. We know we're in the right location. We're seeing some results. On the next slide, if you don't mind, please, we'll see some drill intercepts that were achieved. There's some interesting numbers. There's up almost 5% of copper. There's a few grams of gold. And so there's certainly something going on. There's something driving this. The one factor that really makes it a little bit tricky is the depth. So what we're looking at is probably up to 300 and 400 meters of cover. You're going to get to the bedrock, and then we're talking almost kilometre deep holes. So it's certainly not something for the faint-hearted. It's potentially not really within reach of junior exploration territory. And that's why we're talking to people about potential joint ventures, potential farm-ins, so we can try and get a well-funded partner to come in and really explore this tenement to uncover what the potential is. We're seeing some things going on. We're really excited by it, but we just need that real push to be able to drill some holes. I think in the past, Artemis has done about 10 to 12 holes. It's about 11,000 metres of drilling. So there's enough science to indicate something's going on, but it needs to take that next step to really fully understand what the potential is. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of the company. Market cap's about $25 million. We've got not quite a couple billion shares on issue. We do have a shareholding in Green Tech Metals, which is by virtue of that they were spun out from our company a couple of years ago. We've got we are dual listed, we're on the AIM market, for those who aren't aware. So we've got some really important funds on our register, Jupiter Asset, we've got Deutsche Balaton, Strata Investments. So we've got some really good fund managers who are quite supportive of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, certainly in this last 6 months and in the next 6 months moving forward. So a nice position to be in. Next slide, please. One of the last slides, the board of management. We've got a small but concise board. Guy Robertson, who's been around the company for a number of years, he brings an element of financial expertise to the board. Myself as executive director with a corporate and marketing background. Vivian Powell, who is a metallurgical engineer, a multitude of experience in the industry, currently has a senior executive position at Linus. And Elizabeth Henson, our UK-based director, international lawyer, and plenty of global corporate experience. So a small, well-rounded, concise board to lead this company on its next phase. Next slide, please. Investment highlights. Well, we think we're a really highly prospective company. We've got some fantastic commodities in gold, copper, and lithium. We're in an amazing jurisdiction in the West Pilbara of Western Australia. It's tier one. Everything's laid out for us. Regional hubs, access, ports, rail, admin. It's all there. We've got significant exploration upside with a number of prospects we've got in our tenements. We certainly believe we've got a lot more to be discovered. A starting resource at Carlo Castle and a processing plant at Radio Hill. So there's certainly a lot of boxes that we already tick before we even start finding more of the commodities that we're searching for. So please follow the story. Next slide, please. That's all on the deck. Look, as I say, it's a really quick spin through. It is on the platforms for your leisure to have a look at. David will certainly ask for some questions shortly, but I'm always available to speak to shareholders or interested parties. So please reach out, and I really appreciate your time, and thanks for being able to present this to you.
Thanks, George. Stack of questions, so let's just get straight into it. Were you surprised at the extent of mineralisation so close to the Carlo deposit, and does it mean anything different to the potential for this tenement?
Yeah, I guess it's something that we knew had the potential to exist because these prospects were delineated. I guess we were surprised certainly by how high grade the rock chips were, how much gold we were seeing at surface, and how far we could see the strike. So, it's when you scratch back the surface and you're finding that sort of level of gold, it really fills you with an element of motivation and confidence that the more that you do, the more that you'll find. And, I'm being led by an excellent team of technical people. And as I've said a number of times during the presentation, that they've confirmed that these things just don't happen in isolation. Where there's one, there's others. So we kind of had an inkling there might be something. But again, look, as you say, we didn't expect to find it so close and at such high grade and so close to surface. So, yeah, it's exciting. It's certainly unexpected, but it's a pleasure to find it.
You did touch on in your presentation, there's a question here. Investors are familiar with conglomerate gold nuggets, but you have said the latest discovery is not this style of mineralisation. Can you talk about that a little bit further? I know you did touch on it in your presentation, but I've got a question here, so wondering
that's all good.
Give a bit more detail.
Yeah, so the conglomerate story that was on the past Artemis discovery pathway was actually on a different group of tenements. So those tenements are no longer in the portfolio. But again, shareholders are welcome to go back and have a look at the prior announcements. And there are some there with some really interesting and compelling pictures of tables full of nuggets that they were discovering. But as I was pointing out, that these nuggets were in alluvial soil, so they were just free nuggets. And it was something that was really hard to track. The nuggets are quite smooth, they weren't angular, so it suggests that they've travelled a distance from its source. So what we're seeing now is we're not seeing nuggets, we're not seeing them in alluvials, other than the small amount we found at the Sing 6 prospect. But certainly at Titan, what we're seeing is the gold in the hard rock and in the quartz. So we're sitting on the actual source of the gold. And that's a really important distinction, because what that means is that we can drive economics, we can drive volume by virtue of finding the source. The Titan prospect might be big, it might be small, we don't know, but at least we're sitting on the source of where this material comes from. So the fact that we've got that means that we have the potential to find not where to look for them. So finding nuggets is quite important from the point of view of at least there's gold there, but finding the source of this stuff is far more important.
In terms of the potential for scale within the hard rock gold veins, can you provide any more detail on that?
Yeah, look, it's really the only way you can tell how big these things may or may not be is to do the work, and ultimately that requires drilling. We know it's a fairly fertile area. We can see what the potential is just by looking at other discoveries through the region. And I keep on harping on De Grey's Hemi discovery, and as I say, not for 1 minute believe that we're going to find something as big as, but what we have the potential, and what we're seeing on the tenement and what we're seeing on the ground, and with these mashup of structures and faults, is that we have the capacity for these fluid pathways. And where these fluid pathways exist, and what it is basically super hot water that comes up from the Earth's core, and it takes all these trace minerals with it, and they melt out at different points or attach to different materials, like the quartz for the gold. So we know that where there's structures, faults, and shear zones, it is the potential pathways. So we've got a multitude of that through our tenements, and that at least provides us the opportunity to find these multiple medium to large size deposits. Again, we'd be very fortunate if we're able to find multiple Carlos, but that's what we're looking for. We know we can grow Carlo a little bit. We can get some incremental ounces, which is fantastic. But if we can find 2, 3, 4, 5 Carlos, then that's going to be a real game changer for us. And we believe we're on that pathway.
What follow-up work will you be looking at to test for hard rock gold prospects? Will a drill rig be out there anytime soon?
We'd like to think so, David, or whoever asked that question. We do have some clearances. As I suggest, we've got clearances at Lulu Creek, so we'll be able to drill that once we get the written report. Mount Marie, the same thing. If we put a hole down to that prospect. Up at Titan, we would still need to do some clearances. So there is a bit of a pathway and a process that we need to go through. But to build up to that point, there is a little bit more work that we can do. So we'll be doing some more ground reconnaissance. We still haven't fully mapped the tenement, so we'll be doing some more work on that, which will involve looking at satellite imagery. We fly drones over the tenement to really identify potential structures and faults in gold veins. So all that work is a precursor, which will lead up to drilling. But to get drill rigs spinning at Titan, we need to do some heritage clearances, some ethnographic clearances, and wait for those written reports. And unfortunately, it takes time. So, the pathway to drilling there may well be about 3 months or so, which gets us perilously close to Christmas. But it is something that we will certainly be building to. But we need to do the work first, work out where this gold vein's going so we know where to put the holes down once we've got the clearances.
With the Titan discovery, has this altered the company's exploration strategy considerably around its other deposits, including lithium?
It certainly provided a bit more of a focus for us. 12 months ago, with the lithium market the way it was going nuts. Azure was going nuts. There's a lot of companies looking for lithium in this space. And really, I can probably say that if we had discovered Mount Marie 12 months ago, our share price would have exponentially increased. So, as junior explorers, sometimes we're required to pivot where there's a market change. And that's what we probably did along with a lot of others over the last few months or so. But as I suggested, gold's certainly in the DNA, and it's something that we'll be following up at Titan and at Carlo. But lithium is also really important. And there's quite a few people watching what we're doing. We've had lots of discussions with lots of people about prospectivity of our lithium projects. There's large, small, and medium companies watching for our next step as to what we may or may not do. So, it's something I've said to a lot of people, that the West Pilbara is only a small area. There's a lot of people exploring. There's a lot of commodities, but there's not going to be 10 lithium plants or 10 gold plants or 10 copper plants built in a very close proximity. So at some point, somehow, some way, we believe there will be some corporate activity to bring some of these commodities or assets together. Lithium is certainly one that's not going to go away. The prices come back, but we believe therein lies opportunity. So it's something that we will continue to do work on, but gold will probably take a little bit more of a front foot over the course of the next 3 to 6 months.
You touched on drilling at Titan and the timeframe there. Do you expect drilling across any of the projects this year?
Yeah, as I said before, maybe Lulu Creek's the first one. The clearances have been achieved. We're now just waiting on a final written report. We do have that government grant that we can take advantage of, so we'd like to do that. So we anticipate all things being fair and equal, hopefully, mid to late September, we'll be able to get a drill rig spinning at Lulu. If the market demands and the prices are such, we may well also put some holes down at Mount Marie just to see what the pegmatites are doing subsurface. So that could be really exciting. If we've delineated some targets, we've already got clearances on the Carlo tenement, and we do have some clearances already, then we may well look at putting 1 or 2 wildcat holes down at some of the known prospects to be able to better understand the mineralogy of what's going on there. So, yeah, there will be some drilling action. Unfortunately, maybe not at Titan in the short term over the next couple of months, but we'll work towards that. But on the other side of the coin with Lulu, Mount Marie, and other prospects, it's something that will happen sooner rather than later.
You touched on the processing plant and the fact it's fully permitted, which does give you a bit of an advantage. Are there much time and financial costs associated with bringing that back online should you want to?
It all depends on the commodity. I think it's, as I said before, it's processed nickel and copper. We've been in discussions with other parties for the processing of copper ore. We've had a look at the CapEx on that. It's not insurmountable. Probably worked out to about $50 million to bring it up to speed. So there are options. It's not multiple hundreds of millions of dollars, to get it going again. It's been on care and maintenance for a while, so it will require some work. But it's, as we say, it's halfway down a developmental pathway. It's fully permitted. The ability to be able to pivot to almost any commodity is quite interesting and quite a compelling asset for us to have. So, we've talked to a couple of neighbours, we've talked to a couple of companies about possibilities, not to mention our own processing, if we get down to that pathway. But it's certainly something that could be well utilised. There's not many plants in that area, and with the amount of discoveries going on, it could be a strategic asset for Artemis or another company.
Now, you talked about a wildcat drill hole. There's a wildcat question here. Does Artemis have any antimony exposure today?
Not that I'm aware of. I know in the past that it had some tenements for the same antimony on there, but I think those tenements have gone. So, short of looking in the historical records on our 3 main tenements, I'm not sure. I don't think so at this point. But it's a good question.
And in terms of funding, how well funded is the company over the next 6 to 12 months to deliver on its plans?
Well, I've got sufficient funding to be able to get through this round of drilling at Lulu and to continue with the ground reconnaissance. We've done a lot of the background work on the lithium, so we know what's going on with that. And then it's a question of being able to put some drill holes in. So we're funded to a point, but as all junior explorers, we don't make money, we only spend it. So at some point, we'll need to go back to market to raise some more funds. But we don't anticipate that to be in the short term. We'd like to do what we say we're going to do before we raise more money. So the first raise I was involved in was in November. We said that we'd go out and find lithium, which we did. This next raise, we said we were going to go out and find and drill some gold. We found some gold. We're going to drill Lulu. So we want to achieve that first. But look, if we get results and we see our share price increasing and we see the market liking it, then we'll certainly take an opportunity to rattle the tin and get some more money to really be able to do some serious amount of drilling and really fully explore the tenement packages we've got.
High quality tenement package, exciting commodities in a tier 1 jurisdiction. George, thanks for the presentation. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. We've got to the end of our questions, so you've batted them all straight over the wicket beautifully there, George. So thanks for taking your time to answer the questions. Thanks to everyone for submitting the questions, and George for your presentation. As George has mentioned, the contact details for the company are on the screen, and he does welcome contact from any shareholders wishing to ask any questions or learn more about Artemis Resources, its projects, or its plans. So, George, thanks for your time.
Look, it's a pleasure to be here. I enjoy talking about the company. I'm really excited about the pathway. And look, I confirm that any shareholder or prospective shareholder that'd like to have a chat, please reach out. I'm more than happy to talk to you.
Well, thanks everyone, wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning or evening. All the best for the rest of your day. And thanks for tuning in. George, thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.